Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the JMMA Monday podcast. It's great to have you back. It is another Monday. It is another week of this podcast. We are on episode 4 now, and I thank you for tuning in and listening to another discussion. We have a special guest with us this week. It's no longer a solo podcast again. We did that once. We might do it again in the future, but for now we do have another guest with us. This week we have Babalu Jack. I would consider this person a good friend of mine. Talked about the JMMA scene, the J Kick scene with him on endless instances. He's the person who has educated me a little bit the J League, the J Soccer League in Japan, and he is also the co-host of the High Kicks and Armbars podcast, which is with CJ of Sogukaku.com, which we've also had on pod before. So we have a lot to discuss with him. And just to start, Babalu Jack, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. It's another hot day here in Kyoto, Japan. So any reason to stay inside, I will happily accept. So thank you for the invite.
Yeah, well, it's a hot day here in Toronto too. I was thinking I should turn off my fan so that maybe it doesn't show up in the background of this recording, but I feel like I might actually melt into my chair if that happens. So the fans give you on the background. Hopefully, the people don't hear it.
People understand. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and if they do hear it, they will understand. So we do have a few interesting topics to get into today. Some of them aren't really necessarily news related, so we will save those for a little later. But first, I want to get to the most interesting news. We are more than a week removed from RIZIN 37. I did some quick thoughts on the event at the last podcast, but we have you here. I want to hear some of your quick thoughts on the event, and I want to start with talking about the Super Atomweight Grand Prix. There was the 4 fights, the 4 winners from it. The biggest takeaways from me was Seiki Izawa getting that quick win, being the only winner in the bracket who scored a finish, and also Park Siwoo really making a name for herself once again with a win over Kana Sakura, building off that RIZIN debut where she beat Reina. So just talking about this bracket, what are some quick thoughts you have?
Honestly, I was more impressed with Siwoo Park's performance in terms of just the way she dominated Kana just all the way through. And it wasn't like, how should I say, just nullified any offense that Kana presented, stuffed all the takedowns, kept her in the corner, the turnbuckle, and was very good at picking her off. And I think for the whole match, that really Kana was very demotivated at the end of it. Looked very beaten down. I think Park, I think she might be a dark horse in this competition. I don't know what you think in regards to that.
No, that's actually the exact term I've been using, dark horse. The issue is I don't really know, and I'll talk about the fight itself in a second, but I don't really know like how far she can go in the bracket, because the unfortunate thing is that this is just 3 rounds. The finals are already right around the corner with 2 more fights left.
This is true.
I call her I consider her a dark horse, but I also wouldn't be surprised if she gets eliminated in the next round, just because already the talent has we've gotten to such a high part of the talent pool in this tournament when there's just 4 people left.
Well, here's the thing. Yes, I think the other 3 probably, maybe the exception of Rena, maybe how do I say? There are more, or have got more in terms of more talent and ability compared to Park. However, I do think Park must go into the semifinals with all the confidence in the world. She's beaten Rena. She's had a fight with Izawa, which I've actually not seen, but by CJ's accord, it was a pretty close affair, which Izawa even had trouble taking her down. And while she's not faced Hamazaki, she is training with someone who has beaten her for the last 2 years. So maybe, yeah, still a dark horse, and maybe, yeah, we're going to assume the Hamazaki fight's coming up next. She'll probably lose that. But I think Park has no reason not to have all the confidence in the world and think, you know what, I can do this.
Yeah, and talking about that fight, you were right in saying that this was not just a win. This was a dominant performance from her, and it really was a statement, in my opinion, because this wasn't her edging out a victory on scorecards. By the end of it, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Kana lost that fight. And I also just besides the fight, like the storyline of Park had just beat the person who won the first RIZIN Atomweight Grand Prix. So that's sort of like, in my opinion, they can sort of run with that story that, Park is now trying to be that next person after dethroning the person who made history with that first tournament. So
It's a
yeah,
very good story to go with. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I really found that to be the most interesting thing in the bracket. I never got to ask you this, and I'll ask you this now that we're on the pod, but
Sure.
do you have like a pick for this bracket?
You mean the tournament in general?
The whole thing, yeah.
Probably Izawa. Just going off, because I'm going to assume that we're going to get. I'm going to assume we'll get Izawa and Hamazaki 3 in the final, which is kind of weird considering that it would be the third time they'll face in a year if it does happen. I think Izawa. That's my pick. What about you?
Yeah, I guess I would have to say that as well. I mean, the issue is that I feel like I don't know, like I want something interesting to happen in this bracket, and I feel like it's almost a bit of a bland answer to say that Izawa was just going to dominate it. I don't know. But if I were to go like putting my money on something, I would have to say it's Izawa, just because her performances in RIZIN so far have been unreal. And if she does face Hamasaki, so I don't think they're going to pair her with Hamasaki in the semifinals. I don't think they would do that because they know that's the bigger fight they could give her. So I do think she would face her in the finals. I think she can beat Park. I think she can beat Reina, and we know that she can beat Hamasaki. She's done it twice, and I would say both those performances were quite strong performances from her. So I guess I would have to say that Izawa was my pick going forward.
We say that though, when we were in the second fight, towards the end of the second fight, the title fight, Hamazaki did, despite the fact she was pretty, like, I would say dominated, I can't remember exactly, but in the last round, she did get Izawa under a bit of pressure. And there was a little part where thinking, oh, might actually,
yeah, that's true.
It wasn't completely decided. So I don't know, but yeah, I still pick Seika to win the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the way I feel about it is like, if Hamasaki is this deep into her career, I don't think there's going to be anything like dramatically changing about how she fights. But I think that Izawa, who is still in her early 20s and is still only 7-0, she can still grow as a fighter, which is almost like, crazy to think about because she's at the top of the division right now. I personally believe she can still grow more as a fighter. So if they were to face again in the future, I just think it would weigh even more towards Izawa in their third meeting. But that's just how I feel about it. Thinking about the rest of this card outside the bracket, were there any fights in particular that stood out to you?
Well, you know me, I do enjoy my kickboxing, so I'm gonna have a slight bias and go in that favor. I think everyone dug the Kasahara and Ishizuki fight. I think that was probably for many the fight of the night, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that maybe I'm reading into a trend that doesn't really exist here, but I feel like what RIZIN does is they book a lot of these kickboxers where they aren't necessarily the most successful guys. They aren't necessarily the most notable guys, but these are guys that will show up and throw down. We always see these kickboxing bouts on RIZIN cards where you're like, these two guys are really going at it,
Well, I mean, in retrospect, and to be honest, I haven't watched boxing in years, but a lot of the guys on Beyond Kick really rate Hiroki Kasahara, and he's the shootboxing lightweight champion. And Ishizuki he's a Rise veteran, and he's come off now a 3-fight losing streak. But the previous 2 fights, he lost to Kazama, which was an interim title fight in the featherweight division, and then he lost to Hyuma Hitachi, the second rank or third rank guy. I can't remember exactly, but he's lost to 2 top rank guys. So in retrospect, this was actually a pretty decently booked fight, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know too much about these guys going into it, but I guess the thing that I thought was that this was supposed to be like a showcase for Kasahara. Just looking at how they performed, both of them performed recently. But I mean, this really was quite the fight.
Yeah, it's really my first time seeing Hiroki fight live. I'm more familiar with Yuki, his brother. But no, his time with his left hook was ace. I really enjoyed it. And I thought Ishizuki is toward, especially in the third round where they're like egging each other on to fight, uh, lowering their hands. I thought this was great. This was what the card needed. And yeah, I had a blast watching this.
Yeah, and it almost felt like match quality wise, a lot of the more interesting fights came early, and that was certainly one of them. Because this was overall a bit of a sleepy show. I mean, there was a lot of drawn out decisions, and the show overall, and I guess we'll get to this in a second, but the show overall actually went longer than some people expected, just because of how some fights played out. But
yeah, I had to leave after the Ryusei fight, and I got back around, say, what, 8 o'clock or so? And I was expecting to just catch the tail end of the Izawa fight. And then so it was my surprise when I was seeing Hideo Tokoro come down the entrance. And I was like, oh, wow, we've just wasn't expecting that.
yeah, that's still, that meant there was still like an hour left on the show.
Yeah, which is crazy considering this had 2 or 3 fights cut off it.
Yeah, that's the thing I was thinking about too. Like when I was watching the show and it was like 6 a.m. over here, I was thinking like, oh, this was supposed to be an even longer show, which just seems unreal in retrospect. One more thing about this card, you know, was there any big upset to you on this show? I mean, I think that when I looked at my picks, a lot of the show went about as I expected. But was there anything here that was that you thought was a bit of a surprise?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe the closest was Koji Takeda's win over Johnny
Yes.
Case. But even then, I wouldn't have been surprised to have seen Takeda win that. I think the most impressive thing about that fight wasn't necessarily in terms of any strikes or anything, abilities. It was more, well, ability from Takeda to win the audience. His bursts of emotions really captured the audience, which was surprising because I've always found him to be maybe, I don't know about a bland personality, maybe he's not presented anyway, but for whatever reason the crowd were really on his side. And I think the performance, especially all the suplex, is very fan friendly, and I think he's earned himself, if not a title shot, I would think he get himself another big name international opponent. Or, I mean, Shu has always mentioned him going to Bellator. So I don't know, because I know Bellator's planning, or they're supposedly planning another Japan show. Maybe see him on there. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see him in Bellator. I always, like, I mentioned it on the podcast about 2 weeks ago, like sort of fantasy booking this Bellator RIZIN collab again. It would be interesting to see like what type of matchups they could make, because now we're a couple of years removed from that show they did on New Year's Eve with RIZIN, and they were able to make a lot of these really interesting fights between the two promotions. And now that we've had these 2 years with lots of new names in the promotion, lots of old names cycled out, there's a lot of new matchups you can make, and I'm interested to see what they could do.
Can I throw one fight before you make one potential future fight before you go to the next topic?
For sure, yeah.
I might get hounded down for thinking about this, but I would now love to see Yushi versus Hagiwara. I'm just
Yushi versus Hagiwara.
I'm just curious what the hell would happen.
I feel like if you could put that fight into one word, it would be like sloppy.
Sloppy, yes, but I'm just curious like how the hell Hagiwara would deal with that, because like could he even stop? Now look, Yushi was fighting another, like an Osaka host, so I mean it's Tokyo host versus Osaka host, with Tokyo winning out. So the Kansai market is effectively dead. I don't know, that when I saw that fight, I'm actually curious. Like I would love to see that fight in a weird, perverse way.
You know, I'm personally really interested that they've kept Yushi around, because when he first fought on New Year's Eve against Kota Miura, I thought he was just being brought in as sort of like a body, right? But it's very clear that, I mean, you can tell by how he fights, it's very clear that they like him for his personality. He's like a big charisma guy. So I'm interested. I mean, if he keeps winning, he's probably not going to go anywhere. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do with him. And I highly doubt that they're going to, knowing how quickly RIZIN throws people into the fire, I highly doubt they're going to give him an experienced guy. Like they probably want to give him something like that soon.
That's one of the cases I don't mind that so much. Give him like Clipper or something like that.
Oh no, I don't know about clever, but
I'm all for it.
so we're gonna break a couple of rules here on this podcast.
Oh,
This is the JMMA Monday. We talk about Japanese MMA here, but we are gonna break a rule. We're gonna talk about kickboxing as a little treat. I think we
hooray!
deserved it. Now that you're here on this episode, it's really the time to do it. I looked at the schedule in Japan for kickboxing, and I listened to your podcast recently with CJ, and the two big shows coming up this month at least. There, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It looks like there's a big K1 show on August 10th, and there's a big Rise show on the 21st.
Yes, August 11th, although probably August 10th.
Oh, yeah, it's
Your
the
your
time
site,
zones.
well,
Yeah, yeah.
Fukuoka, yeah. Yeah. K1 got a show in Fukuoka next Thursday. Well, this Thursday when you're releasing this, and I think not too long after that, Rise has an Osaka show, which I will actually be going to. I'm pretty excited for it.
Oh, nice. So when you think about these cards and the quality of them compared to the usual K1 card, the usual Rise card, where would you like place these?
That's an interesting question because are we comparing the last 2 years, or are we comparing pre-pandemic?
Let's just go with last 2 years because I'm interested to see how these promotions are handling things now. They're coming out of the pandemic and now they can bring people in and so on.
Well, from the K1 side of things, they have a featherweight tournament coming up, and it's really it's a great lineup. If I was to give you two guys to keep an eye out for, would be Taito Gunji, the K1 featherweight champ, and also keep an eye on Tatsuya Tsubakihara, the former champ. The reason why I say keep an eye out for them is that they've got quite opposite styles. Taito's very good. He enjoys a good brawl. Tsuba is different. He'll step in, throw a few shots, and then retreat back out, circle, repeat. And that might sound boring, but he does it at quite a pace that is actually very intriguing to watch. It's not everyone's cup of tea. What's interesting about those two is they're in the opposite brackets, opposing brackets, and they are kind of tipped to face in the final, or at least I would tip them to face in the final. And if they are to face in the final, it would be the sixth encounter between the two. Three professional encounters and two in their amateur days. So
now is it billed as sort of like a rivalry between them, or is it just that they've coincidentally faced each other that many times? I mean, I guess if you face someone that many times, you almost by default have to have it like considered a rivalry.
It's definitely a rivalry. I think they've definitely throw like kind of jabs and like pre-fights. I remember Gunji saying that you can't win by running away, and that was before their last fight in Osaka, where Taito. So Gunji actually won the title from Tsubakihara last December. So I think Gunji is currently winning the series 3-2, if I have that correct. But there's other exciting fighters in there. A Muay Thai fighter, Joswai, who was in a previous, I think, hopefully I always get mixed up between, they have like your regular, like say featherweight, and then you have super featherweight, and they do it for all these weight classes. I think he was in the super featherweight, if I'm right, a couple of years ago, and he made it to the final, and he has a couple of good wins over K1 competition. But the whole tournament is, for the most part, I think in terms of it's one of the stronger lineups, certainly in the last 2 years, that K1 have put together. Previously, K1 would put a tournament where you just think they clearly want two guys to meet the final. Why not just book the fights? Because they kind of just have I don't know about mediocre, but they have opponents where you would expect them to win and then reach the final. This one, I mean, I said Gunji and Tsubakihara are probably destined for the final, but they've got some. I wouldn't be surprised if someone else, if it was a completely different final altogether, or just one of them made it. So it's pretty competitive.
If you were to throw in a third person who could sort of break that bracket, who would it be?
Well, I'm in Kyoto, and one of the local boys, Toma, is competing on the card. I bring his name up because he fought Gunji in April, and many thought he won the first 3 rounds. but it had to go. It was ruled a draw, and it went to the extra rounds, and where I think Gunji just had a little bit more in the tank. But I think many are picking Toma to be a dark horse in the competition. So, but it's you've got the Crush champion Nimi in there, who's always exciting to watch. I think it's one of the better. It's certainly one of the better K1 lineups, tournament lineups in the last 2 years.
Now, I'm going to ask you to try to put a little bias aside here because I know you're attending that Rise show coming up. But if you were to say between these two shows, which one you think is more interesting, who would you pick?
Oh, it's actually a tricky question.
And think of this as the perspective that you're watching both on TV.
I would say that's actually tricky. I would say K1, the tournament is the big draw. I'm really excited for that one. But Rise has probably the better undercard.
Okay.
There's a lot of fun undercard fights, and they're bringing in a lot of fighters, international fighters who were initially booked or previously booked in 2020 before shit hit the fan, and they're bringing them back, and they're booking some quite intriguing fights. The only drawback of the Osaka card is that rebooking Kento Haraguchi against Glory champ Petch for the newly created world super lightweight title. This is a rematch from November where Petch just bullied Kento for 3 rounds, just in Muay Thai clinch, kneed him to death. It was not fun to watch, and I don't see what's going to be different over 5 rounds. It just feels way too soon to put Kento in that position again. And this is Rise, which has just lost their ace. They've lost tension, and while they had a good night at the Tokyo Dome, they're still trying to think, shit, who have we got to be our next flag bearer, essentially.
Yeah, the match was the end of a chapter, and everything after this is, what do we do next? You can only bank off that match, that event, the match, that night. After that, it's starting everything over,
I would, if you're watching that show, I would highly recommend catching Masahiko Suzuki versus Seiki Ueyama, Rise bantamweight champion and Shootbox bantamweight champion. If you remember, Suzuki had the really fun fight in the opening fight against Akihiro Kaneko at the Tokyo Dome. This will be probably the fight of the night, I would say. So if there's one fight to catch, probably keep an eye out for that one. That should be ridiculously fun.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the quick preview on both these shows. It seems like an interesting month for the sport, especially you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is like the first big events we've gotten since the match supercard happened in
I would say
May.
so, yeah. I would agree with that. And K1 has another fun show in the Yokohama Arena the following month, which has got more international talent and some intriguing fights on there. So, and I would argue it's a bit better than the upcoming Fukuoka show. So, yeah, I'm excited for these. Yeah, they're good shows.
Now, a big topic at least in my column recently has been accessibility. I mean, it's always an issue on the international viewing scene for Japanese MMA, Japanese combat sports, that the broadcast for a lot of this stuff is very insular and it's hard to access outside the country. Now, one thing that I don't really discuss too much, just because I can't personally talk about it myself, is what is the scene like as a viewer inside the country? So you live inside Japan.
I do.
You are a viewer of these combat sporting events. I'm curious to know, from an accessibility standpoint, what is it like for you? I will say, just going into this, on an international stage, the accessibility issue is sometimes more of a problem of, am I able to access this thing? End of question.
Yeah.
For you, it's more, price and, things like that. And I'm curious to know, how would you rate what the scene is like as a consumer in Japan?
So before the pandemic hit, I mostly watched all my Rising shows on Fuji TV. My Sundays or my weekends would be mostly busy, so I would only have time to kind of finish work and then catch the Fuji broadcasts, which were very average to say best, but they were free and you could watch them and could have a quick, they usually have like digest highlights of all the, like the previous fights before all the main events that would come up. In terms of like since 2020, where there's been less rising on Fuji TV, terrestrial TV, it's usually about 5,000 yen a card, which is what, $40, I think, which is fine for when it was 2020 and it's like, or 2021. Well, the first half or the first half of 2021, where there's maybe like a card every 2 months or so. There was a point where that changed when they introduced Trigger and Landmark, and I, with the step up in shows, but not necessarily a step up in quality, I found myself not necessarily buying the shows as often. And the other thing is that since the pandemic has hit, a lot of the promotions have hiked the prices up. So I think what would have been the cheapest ticket for Rising at 7,000 yen is now, I think, 9 or 10,000 yen. So, I mean, I think it's still, I don't think it's bad compared to, I think it's meant to be more expensive in America. But I don't know. I just it's not so bad. And in terms of accessibility, it's like everything's on ABEMA, like all the kickboxing's on ABEMA, and I can get all the stuff on Rising Live, and even the smaller promotions like Deep, Shoot Boxing. They've all found platforms, pay-per-view platforms to air their content. Which, if that would have even been 5 years ago or even a bit more, that would have been the more trickier stuff, because they were on like kind of satellite
Right.
channels, which were a bit more difficult to find. So
now I'm personally interested in the idea, the usage of pay-per-view currently. So, you know, as you mentioned, RIZIN isn't really on Fuji TV anymore. I don't know if they're going to be in the foreseeable future. And you know, before they had that big New Year's Eve event on Fuji TV, and that was a big thing, but they also had smaller shows throughout the year that would also be on Fuji TV.
yes.
But now it's really pay-per-view is the only way you can access those shows. And also I've noticed, you know, Mikuru Asakura's recent Breaking Down show was on pay-per-view. The match was on pay-per-view. These were both offered through ABEMA. I'm curious, you know, what do you think about how things are changing right now as the scene sort of changes? Like the way I think about it is, you know, everybody knows that you don't need to rely on TV anymore to broadcast something. You know, 10 years ago, that would have been the case, or, you know, 15 years ago. But now there's so many promotions where they're on an internet service, like ABEMA, and they're just not on TV because it's not even needed anymore. And as this transition happens, you know, some are through subscription services and some are doing pay-per-view online, like RIZIN, or like these special events, or like some regional shows. I know Deep Impact, Deep Jewels, they run pay-per-views for their events. How do you feel about this change as things shift to a more online structure where instead of just having, you know, TV and cable, for example, and watching stuff on there, you have to pick and choose what you want to watch?
I mean, I think it's fine as long as you have a product that people want to watch.
Right.
And Rising is in a difficult situation. Well, they've just lost tension, essentially. We talk about Rise has lost tension. So is Rising. They do have Mikuru still, but I always find Mikuru a bit of a wild card, because I think everyone speculates that he's bigger than the promotion, so he could just do his own thing if he wants to, as he's kind of done what proves with Breaking Down. Is that what's called, Breaking Down?
Yeah, Breaking Down. Yeah.
I keep thinking I've got that name wrong. But I mean, for me, I've only bought 2 shows this year, excluding the match. I just the Trigger stuff and the Landmark stuff has just not interest me in general. And just, yeah, I mean, you brought up the J League a bit earlier. I mean, I'm going to shoehorn this example. This might be a terrible example.
Go for it.
If you watch, say, the Premier League, usually you see full crowds. Yeah, usually it's like there's not really an empty seat at these events.
Sure.
That's not necessarily the case here in Japan. Like people do pick and choose what games they go to. So I think that will be the case here. And I think even like with the attendance for Rising 37, it was probably one of the lower attended crowds. So people are maybe thinking, open weight of the tournament, maybe not so grave an undercards. Floyd's coming in a couple of months. I'll hold out. I think, yeah, and yeah, all stuff like inflation and whatnot. It's going to be like, if you have a product that people want to watch and people will buy, absolutely. But then does Rising have that product right now? I don't know. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with, their big star leaving, and we've had lots of injuries and a lot of bad luck this year. So I don't know.
Personally, just to build off that, I've always thought, like, let's just say that RIZIN does have an amazing product, like hypothetically, that every single show is amazing. If you're still running every single event on pay-per-view and you're running, I mean, they were more frequent earlier in the year. Now they're not as frequent. But if you're running a frequent series of shows, some people might just go, well, listen, I want to watch these shows, but the price is getting a little too crazy here. Like, it's adding up. I can't pay for a pay-per-view this frequently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like, for example, in your case, you said you bought 2 shows. I bet there would be shows for you where if they were like on TV for free, you might catch a little bit of it. But when it comes to, forking over the yen for it, you decide, you know what, I don't need this.
And that's me, like being like a more enthusiastic fan that wants to see, like, the VTRs, the video packages, the entrances and whatnot. But sometimes I'm just like, I just don't have time, or it's like I could watch on TV and whatnot. Even like when they had on YouTube and like I would maybe skip like one show and maybe think, okay, it comes out on Wednesday morning, I could just watch the fights then.
Right.
But they've dropped that as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think that going forward, they're going to put fights on Stream Pass, which is interesting to me because I thought putting the fights on YouTube was a very good promotional strategy. I mean, you looked at the numbers these fights did, and they did like surprisingly high numbers. You're talking about, fights getting millions of views, which I just think when you talk about numbers of the popularity of MMA fights, whenever you hit millions of views, you're doing something right.
There's another factor I've just remembered, is that, and this kind of goes back to the fight, when it lost the Fuji slot, a lot of Tension's fan base is quite young, maybe the elementary level, or just a bit, let's say elementary school age. So they are having to rely on parents having to buy the pay-per-view for them, which I don't know. I think when you put when it's not as easily accessible to a certain fan base, then I think you're losing it on a particular audience, if that makes sense.
I've always thought, like, almost as a sort of like a counterpoint, that I think it's good that these scenes are shifting over to the internet right now, because I just think, like, personally, that if you are a entertainment company, for example, and you have a show on TV, if you rely too much on staying relevant through TV and you're not really focused on making that switch over to the internet, which is inevitable, it's inevitable for every show at this point, really, then you're just not going to retain your audience that well, because a lot of people will just, cord cutting is a big thing right now. And one thing I've credited Rise for, along with K1, is that they're on this internet TV service, and it seems to be a successful service.
It's very successful from what I gather.
Yeah, and it just seems like a BIMA as a business structure seems so futuristic to me, because we're seeing all these companies switch over to like internet streaming services, but I don't think we've seen like an organized one in the sense that they have it. Like, over here in North America, I haven't seen a streaming system which is as organized as theirs, where it seems like they have their own content, but they're also bringing in a ton of stuff, and they have TV channels that operate. It seems like the entertainment here is much more split up, and all these companies have their own smaller streaming services and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's only getting bigger because they've now, as you're more probably aware, is they've got some Premier League games here in Japan, and they've got the World Cup I don't know if they've got all the games, but that's going to be more people just interested in wanting to download the products. So,
and I just thought
ice.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just thought that kickboxing got into that service at a really good time.
Very good time, yeah.
And I think that it was beneficial to the sport that it was on this thing that I would presume younger demographics are on. That, you know, TV probably is still dominant with older demographics, and I mean, I'm just assuming here, but the younger demographics are probably shifting to the more internet savvy services. But yeah, I mean, obviously, there's also still a huge benefit to having a thing like the match on TV free to view versus having it pay-per-view exclusive. Like you said, elementary kids getting their parents to buy that show is probably a hard sell in some cases. But yeah, the whole topic interests me because I just think that it's interesting how people's viewing habits might change once things become more pay-per-view online, or things shift off of TV and people might have to be more selective of what they watch. That's a huge issue, just not even in combat sports, but just in entertainment in general, that people are saying, okay, well, I can get Netflix and I can watch Stranger Things and stuff like that, or I can get you know, this other service, I can get Disney Plus and watch all Disney stuff, but it's only my budget to get one of them, so I have to pick something like that. And of course that affects the attention that something gets, like a sport or whatever. One more topic before we get out of here.
Sure.
I'm interested, just as a general topic, what you think about exhibition matches in kickboxing or MMA. And I'm saying this because the date for Mikuru Asakura's exhibition bout, which I can only assume is going to be a boxing match. They said the rules aren't like official yet.
Oh, it'll definitely be boxing, yeah, or special stand-up rules, as they maybe
it's against
the Tension Floyd fight.
Yeah, against Floyd Mayweather. I don't think Floyd would have it any other way. But you know, this is, you know, we've seen
left way rules.
Yeah, they could do that, or they could do, let's just do kickboxing, you know. But you know, we've seen good exhibition matches, most certainly. I think you told me one earlier this week that you were going to bring up. We've seen bad exhibition matches. We've you know, speaking of Floyd Mayweather in RIZIN, we've seen bad exhibition matches. Overall, what are your thoughts on this sort of theme of just doing something that has no real relevance to competing in the sport, just doing something like this where you're throwing it together because why not?
Well, I'll go with some examples from the kickboxing world. The fight I think maybe you referred to that I mentioned was one between the exhibition, excuse me, was one between Takeru and Yuki Igawa.
Yes.
So that was back in 2019, and so the goods these things produce is that you could see potential future matchups. In 2019, Takeru was the, let me see if I got this right, super featherweight champion K1, and Yuki Igawa was in a huge role at the time. He was the Crush champ and had just won a tournament to become the featherweight champion. And they had an exhibition on December that year, and you wouldn't be able to tell it was an exhibition apart from, you know, slightly bigger gloves and well, you can tell exhibition with the gloves and, you know, the padding, but the way they were fighting, you couldn't, because they just went all at it, and it just made people salivate, like dream for, you know, a possible potential fight between these two down the line, which sadly might not happen, or might happen, I don't know. But in that case, yeah. And the other thing is, like, they're good for, like, you know, they're good for good causes. Like in 2018, not 2018, why I say that, 2011, after the big Tohoku earthquake, Masato took part in in some kickboxing exhibitions to raise money for the Tohoku area, Sendai, Fukushima. So you got to see Masato in the ring again after he retired a couple of years prior and made money for a good cause. So win-win there. Yeah, but this Meikuru, I think it's been labeled Meikuru, or maybe I've just labeled it that. It's just all about just boosting bank balances, essentially. I went to the Floyd Tension exhibition. Now I should point out, I bought a ticket prior to the announcement, so I didn't go with the thinking, oh, Floyd Tension, that's for me. No, I bought it prior to that.
It was a New
So
Year's Eve card. You can't miss
it
out on New
was,
Year's Eve.
yes, yeah, it was my first and only New Year's Eve card at this point. So the spectacles is worth it. And in retrospect, Floyd did a good thing. The brat had it coming to him. But I have no desire to see that again. It's just like, because the whole build up to it was negative. Because if I don't know if you remember, like Floyd pulled out, then he pulled it back in. Even like then he was coaxed back in by Sakakibara. Everyone's wondering why it was happening to begin with. People are thinking, why aren't we getting Tension Takeru? People were thinking, why are we getting this? And then we got it, and it was just like, well, I mean, at least it ended in a finish. It wasn't a complete, it wasn't a complete bore, but you're just thinking, what was that? It's like, why was that a thing? Yeah, just everything about the whole experience wasn't fun, and I personally don't see the need to repeat it with Asakura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about it?
So, I think that in retrospect, it's very weird to look at how that Floyd Mayweather Tenshin Nasukawa fight ever happened. Hindsight 2020, knowing that finish happened, that it was an awful moment. For one, bringing Floyd Mayweather in, it's a very costly thing. You have to pay a lot of money to get him there. He doesn't fight for free, or anything close to anyone else in RIZIN, I would imagine. So, it's expensive to bring him in, and for him to come in and essentially, damage the look of one of your stars.
Well, I mean, maybe from the Western perspective, but actually, people still now. This is pre-match, but the Mayweather exhibition is what people most remember. Like, well, if you say Tension and like what fight do you associate him with, they would probably go with the Mayweather exhibition.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, no, in terms of but beyond Japan, yes, I totally understand that. Yeah,
well,
people are just like, yeah.
The sad thing is that outside of the US, that's the only thing, or outside of Japan, that's the only thing Tension's known for.
Yeah.
And I would say that, like, I mean, I can't read the minds of the people behind RIZIN, but I think the idea here was they wanted him
to anyway.
they wanted him to just have a 3-round sparring session with Tenshin, basically, and at the end they can say Tenshin was in there for 3 rounds with one of the greatest boxers of all time.
I think, yeah.
I'd like to imagine that's what they were doing.
I mean, it was what it was. I mean, I think, and to be honest, I think it probably maybe gave them some benefit short term, because we mentioned, because I think Shu Hirata has talked about there's a way that RIZIN makes their money back, and maybe even makes a profit made a profit as a result of the previous Floyd exhibition. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if that's going to be the same case here.
Yeah,
but I was going to say, whatever short-term gain came from it is actually probably hurt them in the long term, because the exhibition might probably has played a role in Tenshin moving on to boxing. And
yeah, that's possible.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe he would have done that anyway. But he made a lot of money I know for a fact he would have made like millions off that exhibition.
Well, when it comes
more than he would on privates.
When it comes to the finances behind it, I personally just think that, like, if RIZIN were, hurting themselves financially greatly by doing this, they wouldn't bring him back a second time. That they clearly did that once, and despite the outcome of Tenshin being stopped within a round, and despite all this and all that, they clearly saw value in having Floyd there. I think that what's interesting to me is, this fight, this upcoming one, it's hard to compare to the Tenshin one, because the Tenshin one, Tenshin he's definitely a star, but he's also the serious prize fighter in kickboxing, so having him,
it's difficult because he's many weight classes beneath Floyd, but at the same time he's the more accomplished striker. If you're comparing, you wouldn't compare Mikuru and Tenshin, but if you would, Tenshin's by far the better striker. So
Yeah, and there was these weird things about it. And it just like Tension is I would argue, Tension is a fighter first and an entertainer star celebrity second, right?
Mm.
But
Mhm.
when I think about Mikuru Asakura, especially in his current form, he is entertainer first, athlete second, right?
I would agree with
So
that. Yeah.
so for him to be in this exhibition match against Mikuru Asakura, it makes way more sense to me than having Tension in there, because Tension is at that time was this one of the top names in kickboxing. And we can't say that anymore now that he's out of the sport. But
Mm.
so it just
He's out of the Beyond Kick pound for pound
exactly, yeah.
rankings. So
As of just a few days ago, he has been banished.
Yod has
Um,
made it official.
exactly. Um, but yeah, I think that this exhibition match, it makes sense in the sense that I don't really think, no matter the outcome of this upcoming fight, I don't think it really does anything bad for Asakura. We have
Hmm.
seen numerous times now where Asakura has lost a high profile fight and then just sort of moved on from it. It didn't hurt his gimmick, it didn't hurt his character or his like clout online.
No, for sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say. I just have no interest in seeing it. I just
Yeah, fair enough.
it's just I think I don't know. I think you could. I don't know. I'm sure. I've lost my trail of thought. I'm just thinking it more says something that you can't really develop another opponent for him to create a high profile match for Rising. You have to bring in someone like Floyd's just to, which I mean, yeah, it does bring in the like casual viewers and whatnot. But I don't know. I'd rather see like a division or like a certain opponent brought up to built up to fight Mikuru. But like you said, he's an entertainer, absolutely. So
yeah, and I'm personally curious, like what even is next for his career after this, because he's out of the title picture. He's really, I wouldn't consider him to be part of like the featherweight division right now, because
I think, I mean, if they offered him a title fight, I think he would take it.
yeah, that's true. Well, I guess. Well, I don't actually. I'm gonna walk back what I said. I think he's definitely still part of the division, but I will say one thing is that he clearly is making way more money doing everything else in his professional life other than fighting.
No, absolutely, and yeah, clearly Rising needs him more than he needs Rising. But
Oh yeah,
who knows? Like I don't know what payday he's going to get from this, but he'll get more opportunities as a result of it, I believe.
and I feel like part of the payday is this is something he can make and already has made numerous YouTube videos about. Yeah, so I guess that exhibition is probably going to be the biggest thing coming out of that September card. We know hardly anything about it right now, but that's the one thing we do know about that card, which makes me assume that it will serve as main event or something.
Yeah, but it's not going to be the biggest. It's not even going to be the biggest event of that day, because we've got Deep Kick on the exact same day in the morning, which hopefully I'll be going to. So So while you all watch Floyd get another easy paycheck, I'm going to the pinnacle of Japanese combat sports,
where people have to crawl and scrape for their paychecks.
Paychecks? What are you talking about?
Hot dog and a handshake, right?
Yes, you're probably not even too far off, actually. Yeah, but yeah, it's Saitama, so Floyd will get confused of where he's at and call it Tokyo. Yeah, it's just a thing. It's
Exciting
a thing that's
things.
happening. It's a thing. I will give you that. It's a thing.
Exciting things or just things. Fair enough. Well, listen, that covers all the topics we have for today. I appreciate you being on the podcast. Before we get out of here, just if any plugs you have, if there's any plugs that you want to have before we get out of here, please go ahead.
Really just a High Kicks and Armbars show that I have with CJ, which I think you might be on a future show very soon.
Oh, I'd be honored.
That, and I'm not really on any social media, but I am on the Beyond Kick Discord along with Jack, and it's a lot of fun. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in kickboxing, even talk like Muay Thai. There's even a bit of karate combat talk in there, which everyone's loving. It's a great place, and there's a lot of fun people there. So please feel free to join and chat away.
Yeah, I co-sign both those plugs. That it's a fun community, and the High Kicks and Armbars podcast definitely worth your time. It's two real specialists in their field of CJ and his covering the Japanese MMA scene, and Babalu Jack with his knowledge and um, you know information, like just this huge encyclopedia of kickboxing information. It's pretty great to see them have their back and forth on that podcast.
I
2
appreciate
episodes
that,
so
man.
far. Hopefully lots more to come, right?
Yeah, I have to cut out all like CJ's Shuto Watanabe tangents, which go on for about 40 minutes. So it's not an easy task, but I really enjoy the show. It's good to chat with him. It's good to. The reason why we came up with the idea is just when the match came out, everyone was excited for Takeru and Tenshin, but maybe weren't so familiar with the undercard.
Right.
Whilst those who are maybe a bit more familiar with kickboxing would say to you like, oh, there's like 3 or 4 fights that match the match in terms of ability, in terms of skill. So it's just, yeah, and it's good. It's just an education process, I guess, because CJ can talk about all the women's scene here, and I would not get bored. He could talk about it for hours, and I would not get bored. So I'm glad you
he
enjoy
can
it.
talk for hours.
He can, yes, he can. But it's a joy to listen to him.
Absolutely. Well, again, I thank you so much for being on this podcast. We definitely got to get you back on at another time. And
Well,
that
thank you,
wraps
man.
up things for this episode, guys. If you appreciated listening, make sure to check out more opinions, news, and content over at knockdownnews.com, MMA news, and our special focus on the JMMA scene, of course, every week with the JMMA Monday column and podcast. Make sure to follow the website on Twitter at Knockdown News. And if you want to follow me, because I'm pretty cool, follow me on Twitter at Jackwannan, JACKWANNAN. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week or when the next episode comes out. Peace.